Let's begin gently. It's early morning. The light drifts softly across the room, and the sky holds that uncertain hue that lingers just before sunrise. The world is still quiet and unhurried. Inside the house, nothing moves. A warm drink rests in your hand. There's no noise, no urgent sound, only the steady rhythm of breath and a mind that hasn't yet decided what to carry from yesterday. Somewhere deep within, a feeling stirs, perhaps a residue of old worrying, or the subtle edge of future concern. And yet, in the midst of this stillness, something shifts. In the modern world, this may show up in ordinary moments. A sharp comment in an email, a disappointing message, a wave of annoyance in a crowded place. The founder, Zeno of Citium, lost everything in a shipwreck. With nothing left, he turned to philosophy. What he discovered was revolutionary. You may not control fate, but you do control the shape of your mind. But in every moment, you can choose a thought that brings clarity rather than confusion. You can choose perspective over panic. You can choose acceptance over resentment. And that choice is everything. Is it the voice that craves more and more, or the one that urges restraint and balance? Were they helpful or hurtful? Were they stabilizing, or did they deepen the spiral? Stoicism reminds us that we are not powerless in the face of thought. We can choose what we cultivate. Just as a gardener removes weeds to allow flowers to grow, we can clear space in our inner world, not by suppression, but by gentle awareness. We can learn to recognize which thoughts serve us and which we can release without judgment. Is it driven by pride, anger, fear, or by clarity, purpose, and kindness? The Stoics point us away from chaos and into the stillness beneath it. They guide us toward thoughts grounded in virtue, patience, honesty, courage, discipline, and wisdom. These aren't abstract ideals. They are quiet practices, lived out in the mind each day, moment by moment, even when no one else is watching. And from that control, all dignity, all freedom flows. In those moments, the initial response may rise quickly: defensive, hurt, reactive. A practice of shaping a mental environment that supports calm even in the midst of storms. It's not about perfection. It's about building a sanctuary within, where reason can take root and grow strong. But with awareness, another path appears, a space between the stimulus and the response. In that space lives choice. And in that choice, a more thoughtful life begins to take shape. A calm presence arises not with force, but with clarity. And so, by tending carefully to the thoughts we allow to stay, we are quietly shaping the very person we are becoming. The shoulders soften, the jaw releases, and breath begins to expand gently again. We are co-authors of our experience. The mind is not a passive mirror, it is a sculptor. What you feed it, stories, interpretations, judgments, becomes its form. That's why the Stoics train themselves, daily, to notice harmful thoughts, and to replace them, not with fantasy, but with truth. A single, centered thought has quietly turned the moment into something whole. That's the often unnoticed power of thought, not the loud, impulsive kind, but the kind that is chosen, repeated, and allowed to shape the tone of your being. The ancient Stoics urged us to pay close attention to this realm. He wasn't searching for recognition or aiming to impress others with elegant ideas. He was quietly trying to hold on to what mattered most to him, what he believed would help him remain clear, centered, and in control of his own mind. In the quiet hours after long, uncertain days, he turned to writing not as a performance, but as a private ritual of remembering. Remembering that true strength is not found in domination, applause, or changing the outside world, but in self-mastery. Not in resisting life, but in understanding it. Not in escaping difficulty, but in facing it with steady breath and focused attention. In a world filled with noise and urgency, the inner dialogue becomes more important than ever. We are inundated with input alerts, opinions, predictions, but few reminders to examine what we are thinking and why. This quiet self-awareness, according to Stoic teaching, is where real freedom begins. The Stoics themselves lived in harsh and unpredictable conditions. They knew political instability, illness, betrayal, and exile. And yet, their words do not echo despair. Instead, they spoke consistently of calm, of the power to remain composed in the face of upheaval. Their insights remind us that life's events may be beyond control, but how one interprets and responds to those events remains a personal responsibility. The external world may strike, but the internal world is ours to train and tend. That was the ground on which their practice stood. They saw thought not as a decoration of the mind, but as its very structure. Thought becomes the shape through which we meet life. When filled with resentment, fear, or blame, our experience begins to mirror that distortion. But when thought becomes gentle, clear, and rooted in reason, it creates space inside. And from that space, a more measured, peaceful life can emerge. This space is where transformation begins, not in grand declarations, but in subtle shifts. For the Stoics, the soul was not static, it took on the qualities of the thoughts it held. Stoic philosophy arose in the 3rd century BCE, born in a time of chaos, war, and collapse. The Stoics believed we are not mere victims of external events. And truth, to the Stoics, is simple: you are mortal. You will face loss, you will be misunderstood. The world is not obligated to be kind. When Marcus Aurelius sat alone with his thoughts, writing what would later be known as Meditations, he was not composing a treatise for the world. From this quiet habit, we inherit a vital question: what kind of thinking shapes a good life? Think for a moment about one of your most difficult days. A day filled with disappointment or confusion. What thoughts filled your mind then? Over time, this becomes a kind of inner craftsmanship. In ancient times, long before the hum of electricity and the chatter of digital life, human beings lived with far fewer distractions, but no less turmoil. Wars raged, empires rose and fell, loved ones were lost to illness, and fate remained as unpredictable as ever. It was within this fragile and turbulent world that Stoicism emerged, not as a lofty theory, but as a practical framework for living. Founded in Athens by Zeno of Citium around 300 BCE, Stoicism was forged during times of instability. Its ideas were not created in peace, but in struggle. The Stoics weren't trying to escape reality. Stoicism doesn't ask you to pretend that suffering isn't real. Instead, it asks you to pause before reacting, to observe your thoughts, question them, and then decide, is this thought helping me live well? Is it rooted in truth, or fear, anger, ego? Just because a thought enters your mind doesn't mean it deserves your trust. The mind is not a dumping ground. It is a sanctuary, and sanctuaries must be tended. He encouraged students to delay judgment and let thoughts settle before choosing which ones to believe. If someone succeeds in provoking you, he said, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. Each thought held power. Each decision of the mind shaped the path of a life. You begin to notice the patterns, what uplifts you, and what quietly drains your energy. You realize that many thoughts arrive without invitation, but you still get to choose which ones stay. In today's loud, fast world, that power matters more than ever. Ancient wisdom offers a reminder. Even in the middle of chaos, reason is always waiting. One calm, intentional thought planted like a seed can shift everything. It might not solve every problem, but it can change how you meet the moment. And that, the Stoics believed, is where true strength begins. If you seek wisdom, begin by planting wise thoughts. If you desire peace, cultivate peaceful thinking. If you long for courage, reflect on what courage truly demands. When the mind feels overwhelmed, racing, reacting, resisting, return to the most essential truths. This thought is not who I am. This emotion will pass. I can begin again. In that pause lies your freedom. That statement isn't an accusation, it's an invitation. You are free to choose a better way, even when insulted, misunderstood, or mistreated. You retain the ability to decide which thoughts to hold. They were learning how to remain rooted in it. He wrote reminders to himself. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. In another entry, he gently observed, "Your mind will take the shape of what you frequently hold in thought." These were not abstract statements. They were lifelines. Just as repeated drops of water can hollow stone, repeated thoughts can reshape the soul. Your thoughts aren't just passing clouds. They tint everything. When you feel overwhelmed, you can ask yourself, what am I believing right now? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Is it useful? Such questions don't erase hardship, but they turn your attention inward, to the only place where true freedom lives. If you think often of gratitude, you begin to see life differently. If your thoughts dwell on resentment, even the brightest day feels dim. This doesn't mean you must always think positively. That would be dishonest, but it does mean you have agency. You are not a victim of your thinking, you are its curator. You are not merely living inside your mind, you are shaping it. This is why Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome and philosopher king, kept a personal journal, not to impress others, but to remind himself daily of what truly matters. In one entry, he wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." He believed that suffering often comes not from events, but from how we interpret them. We are more often frightened than hurt. He wrote, "And we suffer more from imagination than from reality." In other words, we create much of our pain in our minds, and can also reduce it there. The mind that spins worst-case scenarios can also be taught to anchor itself in reason. Unlike other schools of philosophy that sought retreat or transcendence, Stoicism was shaped by the noise and chaos of the real world, the marketplace, the battlefield, the Senate floor. It was in the everyday that the Stoics placed their experiments. What happens when you lose everything? What happens when fortune abandons you? What remains when all else is gone? For the Stoics, the answer was reason, the inner citadel of thought. To these thinkers, the mind wasn't just a receiver of external impressions. It was a garden, and every thought was a seed. In times of fear, one could still choose to plant calm. The external world may be chaotic, but the inner world, the mind and soul, can remain calm, ordered, and free. Epictetus, a former slave turned philosopher, said it best, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." That simple statement contains an entire worldview. It reframes suffering as an opportunity, pain as a teacher, and thoughts as the architecture of our inner peace. In moments of insult, one could respond with patience. The ancient world was harsh, but the Stoic mind learned to cultivate peace within. This was not an idealistic dream, but a necessary strength, a form of resilience grounded in the belief that no one can take away your ability to choose your inner stance. Even as cities crumbled, the mind remained sovereign. That sovereignty is what Stoicism offers. It is a path not out of hardship, but through it, illuminated by reason and intention. At the heart of Stoicism is the radical idea that we can choose our response to life, no matter what it throws at us. This is not about denial or suppression. The Stoics also believed that thoughts, once chosen repeatedly, become character. That line holds deep power. The Stoic approach is not passivity, it's mastery. It is the art of cultivating deliberate thought, not just reactive emotion. Seneca, the Roman statesman and Stoic writer, frequently warned against being swept away by automatic emotional reactions. Epictetus taught that between stimulus and response, there is a gap, and in that gap lies our power. Even Marcus Aurelius, with the weight of empire on his shoulders, practiced thought selection daily. He didn't write grand manifestos. To the Stoics, thoughts were never random, they were chosen. Understanding the Stoic view of thought isn't about chasing perfection, it's about developing gentle awareness. Theory without practice is like a tree without roots, easily swayed, easily broken. Stoicism, despite its ancient origins, was never meant to live in books or lectures. It was always meant to walk with us into the crowded street, the meeting room, the quiet moment of frustration. The Stoics didn't retreat from life's chaos. They stepped into it with a sharpened mind and a prepared heart. But how do we apply these timeless principles today, when we're bombarded by news that inflame us, jobs that demand more than we can give, and social media that constantly compares and critiques. To live with calm clarity in modern life is a real challenge. Every day brings noise, negative headlines, tense deadlines, conversations that drain. When someone close to us lashes out or withdraws, the mind often leaps to conclusions. They don't care about me. This is unfair. Why does this always happen? But a Stoic approach invites a pause or redirection inward. A passing sadness is compounded by the belief that something is broken. This is where Stoic practice becomes real, anchored not in theory, but in quiet, daily acts of remembrance. One such act is the morning journal. Before the noise of the day arrives, setting aside a few moments to write down a few thoughts worth carrying becomes a form of preparation. What kinds of thoughts brought peace? Which ones stirred restlessness or impatience? This review is not for self-criticism, but for gentle refinement. Each day offers the mind a garden of possibilities. Some thoughts nourish, others deplete. Knowing the difference is a form of wisdom that grows only through observation. They are not grand declarations, just simple directions of the heart and mind. Over time, these repeated intentions become a compass, quietly guiding decisions and reactions throughout the day. An anxious thought becomes overwhelming because we treat it as proof of weakness. Before stepping into the world, the Stoics practiced imagining possible frustrations, a late appointment, harsh words, disrupted plans. This exercise is not to invite worrying, but to develop a grounded readiness. If something unplanned occurs, the mind is not caught off guard. It responds with steadiness, not panic. This mental rehearsal builds resilience not through avoidance, but through acceptance and preparation. The Stoic approach suggests stepping back, observing the feeling without judgment, and noticing what we may be adding unnecessarily. In that space of honest observation, emotion is no longer an enemy, it becomes a messenger, something we can meet with awareness rather than resistance. In moments of emotional charge, this pause can mean everything: a breath, a short stillness, a quiet check-in. Is this next response aligned with who I wish to be? Or is it simply a reflex from habit and past reaction? This moment of interruption allows for clarity, and from clarity, better choices emerge. Ask, what story am I adding to this event? The world outside may not change, but the way it is met does. Life is no longer just something to endure, but something we participate in consciously. It is through the care we give our next thought, the attention we offer to our reactions, that a new kind of strength quietly begins to take root. Often, the event is neutral, but we layer it with judgment, assumption, and emotional weight. Instead, the Stoic chooses compassion not as a weakness, but as a discipline. They remind themselves, this person, like me, is suffering in their own unseen way. That shift doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it prevents the flame of resentment from consuming the peace of the inner self. Notifications that nudge our focus away from the present. In this environment, how can anyone maintain right thinking? This idea may seem simple, even obvious, but when fully lived, it is liberating. Waves of anxiety, shadows of regret, and the weight of inadequacy can rise without warning. The Stoics did not deny the presence of these emotions, but they invited a different way of seeing them. Rather than reacting or building layers of meaning upon feeling, they encouraged a calm examination, gently questioning what a particular emotion truly represents. It allows us to engage without attachment, to care without clinging, to respond with wisdom instead of reactivity. And in this way, love itself becomes more grounded, less about control, more about presence. The answer, the Stoics would say, is not to escape but to train. Imagine facing a colleague who constantly criticizes or dismisses your ideas. The immediate reaction might be resentment or self-doubt. But Stoicism invites a deeper question: what am I truly in control of here? You can't change their personality, but you can choose your response, you can choose your tone, you can choose to learn from the discomfort rather than react to it. Even in the face of failure, missing a deadline, losing a client, receiving harsh feedback, the Stoic path remains the same. Return to your sphere of control. Ask, what did I do well? What can I do better? And what is beyond my power to change? To train the mind the way we train the body. Slowly, daily, gently but consistently. At the end of each day, take 5 minutes to reflect, not to judge, but to observe. Write down one thing you did with integrity, one moment where your mind faltered, and one thing you'll approach differently tomorrow. This simple act creates space between stimulus and response. It replaces shame with awareness. It transforms the chaos of daily work into a practice ground for reason and self-mastery. Because the most powerful thoughts are not random. They are practiced, and practice begins where you are. Let's take a closer look at how these practices show up in everyday life. In the workplace, Stoic thought shines brightest in moments of stress. One powerful exercise for cultivating this mindset is the evening work journal. Relationships, too, test the clarity of our thoughts. One of the most powerful Stoic reminders in relationships is this: I control only my thoughts and actions, never those of another. Now turn inward. In the quiet spaces of the mind, it is often where the deepest storms gather. Often, the suffering we experience is not just the emotion itself, but what we choose to believe about it. To shift into this way of thinking requires more than occasional insight. It needs habit, structure, repetition. Another daily tool drawn from Stoic tradition is the mental rehearsal of difficulty. Evening offers a second moment of reflection. After the day ends, the mind can revisit its choices. One small but transformative gesture is the act of pausing. Over time, these quiet practices shape a different way of living. If you spent just 1 week observing the flow of your own thoughts, what might you discover? In the quiet corners of your inner world, beneath the surface of daily tasks and distractions, a river of thought is always moving. Some of it is calm, and that simple shift, practiced again and again, begins to reshape not only our emotions, but our entire way of being. Thought becomes less like a weather system that happens to us, and more like a garden we tend each day with care and purpose. A person who practices Stoicism doesn't seek to eliminate all negative emotion, but to become more aware of how their thoughts interact with it. Morning journaling, evening self-review, brief pauses before reacting. These weren't rituals for ritual's sake. They were ways of training the mind to return to reason. Over time, the habit of returning to steady thought, like returning to a breath in meditation, begins to transform the mind's default posture. And ask, if I could choose one guiding thought for today, one thought to carry like a compass, what would it be? It doesn't compete for attention like the noisy world outside. But it is always there, waiting for you to return. You don't need to be perfect to find it. You don't need to be uncheckable. You only need to be willing to look inward and listen. You are slowly shaping the soul. With every intentional thought, you become the quiet architect of your inner life. Even Stoicism never offered such guarantees. But what it offers is a grounded perspective, a way of seeing the world that does not collapse when adversity strikes. It gives you a framework that holds steady, a lens through which even hardship becomes a teacher. You may not choose every event, but you can choose how you meet each one with presence, patience, and principle. See you in the next meditation. Over time, that inner world once scattered or overwhelmed begins to resemble a place of calm shelter. A quiet strength takes root, a subtle joy begins to rise. Perhaps, I will be calm, or I will not take things personally, or simply, I will return to myself. It doesn't have to be poetic. And a willingness to return again and again to the ones that serve your highest self. A single breath of calm in the middle of chaos. A quiet decision to forgive instead of resent. A return to presence when the mind tries to flee. These are not minor shifts. They are the foundation of an inner life with depth. It only has to be real, and once chosen, repeated. Not with force, but with quiet loyalty, whispered in the moments that need it most. We become less reactive, more grounded, not perfectly, but noticeably. One that you choose, one that you return to, one that you live by. Sadness may visit, but is it made worse by the belief that it should not exist? Fear may rise, but is it intensified by stories we tell ourselves about failure or rejection? Thought, when left unchecked, multiplies emotion. But thought, when guided with intention, brings clarity. Some of it is restless, but most of it, if we're honest, is repetitive. It's about small, consistent acts of thoughtfulness. Choosing to pause before replying, choosing to assume the best in someone. But maybe you've noticed after, though many days, months, or even years, how exhausting it is to be swept away by every anxious forecast, every spiraling doubt, every harsh inner judgment. Maybe you've grown tired of waking up already bracing for the worst. Maybe it's time not for a dramatic change, but simply to pause, choosing to breathe instead of rush. These are small acts, but they add up. And over time, they reveal something profound. Your mind is not your enemy. It's your instrument, and with care, it becomes an ally. We replay conversations, we imagine outcomes, we critique ourselves, plan for trouble, or judge others without intending to. And again and again. Many of these thoughts are not new, they are patterns, deeply worn grooves in the mind. They often bend toward anxiety, doubt, fear, or comparison. Not because we want them to, but because we've rehearsed them for so long. And yet, if you introduced a single shift, if you chose to interrupt one of those thought loops with a moment of calm, a feeling of gratitude, a breath of reason, what might begin to change? What if, instead of asking what am I thinking, we asked, what kind of thought am I nourishing right now? Because the truth is, not every thought deserves your attention. Not every worrying needs your energy. Some thoughts may knock at the door, but you are not required to let them stay. This shift in perspective is the essence of Stoic practice. It reminds us that we are not simply thinkers, we are the choosers of thought. The Stoics taught that our thoughts are not invisible rivers, they are the force that shapes our character, our soul. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and philosopher, believed that the soul takes its color from the thoughts it harbors. If you constantly dwell on anger, your character begins to harden in its image. If you nourish fear, you begin to shrink from life. But if you make space for calm, patience, clarity, those to take root, and slowly, they bloom. This teaching isn't abstract, it's practical. That is why the Stoics encouraged reflection as a daily habit. And this isn't about grand, philosophical breakthroughs. No one can force you to change. No one can demand that you begin thinking differently. To stand still for a moment, to close your eyes. Within each of us is a still place, a quiet chamber of the soul where wise thoughts live. This place doesn't shout. This is the heart of Stoic practice, not perfection, but awareness. A gentle, honest attention to the thoughts that rise and fall each day. A thought may seem like a small thing, but one true, steady thought can change everything. And when you begin to cultivate thoughts that are clear, compassionate, and rooted in reason, you are engaging in something deeper than mere positive thinking. No one can promise a life without pain, uncertainty, or sorrow. And all of this begins not with dramatic change, but with something small, a single, deliberate thought. Let that thought be your guide. Let it lead you inward. Let it lead you home. Thank you for walking this journey with us.